So this question is one of the hardest questions for someone to answer if they are dating a narcissist or deciding if they should let that narcissist back into their life. And I think you're the perfect person to answer this, babe, because you have let one narcissist back into your life, me. And just recently you had an ex-girlfriend reach out and ask like, hey, I've changed. Can I get back into your life? And this is so hard for people because there's so many emotions. It's not as easy as just saying, yeah, just cut them out, because there's so many emotions on the person who is making that decision. And I just really want to hear the story of how you went through it and how you made the right decision. So do you want to tell us the story?
Yeah, it was really interesting because we're starting off the new year, and right on New Year's Day, I get this text message and I'm thinking, what is this? It just feels really interesting when these things are presented to you in your life and you get to observe what you're going to do.
Yeah.
Am I going to make an old decision? Am I going to pattern in my old patterns? Am I going to make a new decision? So as far as some context goes for me in my life, I am a classical empathic person and have a long history of narcissistic ex-partners. And something I've observed about my pattern with people is that I have a really hard time letting people go. I've had it coined in the past as I like to have a little fanny pack full of people that I just carry around with me from all sorts of walks of life, from every different point in my lifetime. And what's part of this pattern is that with the narcissistic partners or friends that I attract, I tend to have this pattern of getting really close, having some episode, whether I'm abused or aggressed by them, or there's lying or cheating, and then we break off the connection, and then some time goes by and they come back and they want to rekindle with me, and I classically forgive instantly. Of course you can come back into my life. And the pattern repeats itself over and over and over again. And so I've been working really hard to become aware of why I continue to choose into these patterns with people. So it's been on my mind. And
obviously we talk about it all the time here, right? And so when this narcissist reaches back out, we were like, whoa, crazy. Like this is things we think about all the time. Like what a perfect opportunity to put things into practice.
Right. So in this particular situation, this person, I'm just going to call her Chloe.
Sure.
To make things easy. When Chloe reached out to me on New Year's Day, she said, hey, Happy New Year. I've been thinking about you. I love you and I miss you. And what was really interesting was to watch this split in my psyche where I was having two reactions happening simultaneously at once. Reaction number one was this inner knowing of, I've seen this before. I know what this means. This means that you miss me because you are starting to feel the consequences of your actions and me not being in your life. And you want to feel that connection with me again. And you want me to continue to provide what I have provided for you in the past. And you've made some change in your life that now feels like you can confidently display that you're ready to reconnect. And no judgment, no emotion really there, just completely logical, like, oh, I've seen this before, I understand what's happening. Reaction number two was a complete cascade of emotions, a total death spiral. And I was experiencing everything from intense, almost toxic emotions of, yes, absolutely, I want you, I miss you, I love you, and nothing necessarily even romantic at this point, as she was looking to rekindle as friends.
Yeah.
But just to be clear, but of course those deep feelings of love and adoration are all there. Also feelings of guilt and shame for wanting to have her back in my life after knowing everything that has happened between us and the abuse that I've experienced by her hand. feelings of deep confusion, wanting to understand, why now? Why did this happen? Why did we even have to disconnect in the first place, even though it was something I chose to do because the pattern was out of control? But a lot of emotion. And I remember I was just trying to get my thoughts together, and I took out my trusty ChatGPT, and I'm like, what is happening here? Help me understand what's happening. And the main theme that I pulled away from that conversation was to try and understand if my reaction was coming from a wounded place or a healthy place. Because my instinct was to automatically text her and say, I love you too, and I missed you too, and when are you coming over? But there was some part of me in my logic reaction number one that was like, hey, slow down. This really intense, almost overwhelming emotional response seems out of proportion for the situation, so it needs to be looked at. And as I looked deeper and was talking to Jordan about it, I started to recognize that there was a lot of feelings of conflict, because on one side, I have years of data of being abused physically and emotionally by this person. But on the other side, I have this feeling of, I just, at my deepest core, want to be seen and understood and loved by somebody, anybody. And she has done that for me in the past. She's accepted me.
She's really good at it. I learned just how great of a partner she was to you in certain ways too, through this experience. But keep going.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that most people experience with narcissistic loved ones, is that they're not all bad.
Yeah, of course.
There's so much beauty, and I kept thinking about, well, there's all these things I love about her, and she struggled with alcohol, and it's not her fault because she was abused growing up, and I just kept justifying her actions and really trying to find a reason to bring her in. And what it came down to was that I felt really conflicted, and it really threw me off for a whole week. And what I started to realize was that these two versions of me were what I labeled like my healthy self, which I've been developing and working on really all the time, and then my wounded self, which was the part of me that got me into that relationship in the first place.
Yeah.
So healthy Kira understands that in order for me to have the life that I want, I cannot continue to allow people to abuse me. And then wounded Kira is thinking, the abuse that happened is forgivable, and all the good parts are worth all the bad parts. I'm willing to try again. With the glimmering hope that she has changed, even though we've done this multiple times. Yeah. Her saying she's changed, I let her back in, the abuse continues, I have to take space, she comes back, wants to try again. So it was really complex for me, and as I sat with it, I thought, well, I don't want to get in on this cancel culture that's really popular with narcissistic people. Yeah. Where, the blanket statement is, if they're narcissists, just cut them off, starve them out, take away their supply, don't even respond, don't even give them the time of day.
Totally.
And in my heart of hearts, I don't believe in that. And
well, I mean, we spend our time coaching narcissists and loved ones in our support groups and one-on-one sessions, and we know the potential of watching people change, and so someone you love so much, that had to have been extremely hard, right?
Yeah, I kept thinking, what's the difference between her and Jordan?
Yeah.
Right? And I'm willing to sit with you and work through these challenging narcissistic patterns and habits that we have together. And so I felt, well, it's my duty. I owe her this. I need to help her. I need to help her heal. She doesn't even know she's a narcissist, but, I should be able to tell her and work through this with her. But I had this recognition that what the most beneficial thing that I did in our relationship was to begin holding you accountable. Mm. And so that was the first thing that arose in this conflict from logic Kira. She was telling me, hey, or healthy Kira, I should say. Healthy Kira, and using her logic, was saying, hey, if she has changed, then she should display some accountability. And she should have a deep understanding of what, and should is a weird word, but she should,
Yeah.
I would like that. I would like to see that in order to feel comfortable rekindling.
I think that's totally fair. That,
Right?
Yeah.
So in this conversation, I said, hi, it's so good to hear from you. What made you decide to reach out? And this began a conversation of, her displaying very typical narcissistic tendencies, which is okay. But she's using this grandiosity of, these are all the accomplishments that I've had over the last year. These are all my achievements. These are all the things that I want, and I want you, and I need you, and I want you to see me in all my accomplishments. And it was really hard because there was, once again, wounded Kira wants to validate all of those accomplishments and say,
Yeah.
wow, I am proud of you, and that's amazing, and I do want to see you in that, because wounded Kira wants the relationship and the pattern to continue.
Yeah.
Because it's comfortable.
Yeah.
But then healthy Kira is saying, that's not accountability.
Yeah.
Accountability is saying, hey, Kira, I'm reaching out because I owe you an apology for all of the abuse that I've put you through. So I wanted to gently guide the conversation in that direction, and I was just really honest. I said, I'm really amazed to hear you've made all of these changes, but my concern is that your focus is more on your accomplishments and your wants and needs, and not in the direction of acknowledging the pain that you've caused and the patterns and dynamics that were at the core of our relationship that are why I walked away in the first place. So I need you to express to me and display your understanding of that before I feel comfortable connecting. And she sent me probably at least an hour of audio messages over the course of the days, just trying to explain herself. But there were so many excuses, so much justification for it. And we were able to get to the point at the end where I just kept gently re-guiding her towards, I hear you, but I can't hear excuses. I need to hear accountability.
Yeah.
That you understand, and we got to the point where I think I helped her whittle it down to where she was able to express, I acknowledged that there was abuse. I acknowledged that there was a lack of respecting consent of your body, respecting consent of your emotions, and that there was lying, that there was cheating, there was all these things. And it was a really hard moment because as I heard her acknowledge all of those things, I felt really emotional.
Yeah.
I was like, I want to just pretend like this didn't happen. I just want to be back in my comfort zone with her. But I sat with it and I just reminded myself that, at the end of the day, I could move forward and help her heal these patterns. But is that something that I want to do and can do without abandoning myself?
Yeah.
And that became the real question of, hey, I have a partner with narcissism, which is a lot of emotional bandwidth already. Sure. I have 5 kids.
Yeah.
We have, businesses and things that we do. And so I just sat with my body and I just asked myself, I envision my inner child, the one that I always ignore and abandon in these moments. And I just asked her, what do you need? And what I really felt was, for the first time in your life, I need you, Kira, to choose not to abandon everything that you've been working on.
Yeah.
And what I've been working on is, my own dreams and projects. And my entire life, I'm in my 30s now, and I'm just now starting my life because my entire life has been devoted to helping narcissists heal or being in toxic dynamics of abuse with narcissists that make it so that I'm constantly in survival mode, constantly in repair mode, constantly in chaos and drama. And so, it was this moment of, I could help her, but I don't have the energy because I would actually have to give up all of a portion of my time and energy to hold that space for her.
Yeah.
And I can't hold that space at this point in my life. And it's not because I don't love her, because I don't forgive her, because I don't want her, but it's actually, in my life as my friend and interacting with you and the kids, it's that I know that on some level, I would still have to abandon parts of myself to let her back into my life.
Yeah.
And that's the truth.
Yeah.
And so I had to make the really hard decision that this isn't actually a matter of me cutting you off and not forgiving you. This is a matter of me choosing to love myself enough that I let you go.
Yeah.
Because there are some relationships that have irreparable damage.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's hard to hear. And I do believe that at the core of the cancel culture around narcissists, that's what people are trying to flag out, is that there is such thing as irreparable damage from narcissistic abuse.
Yeah.
And there have been several people in my life that have tried to rekindle with me that we, for whatever reason, were not able to repair.
Yeah.
Either because of the lack of accountability present or because of the lack of time, energy, emotional space in my life. And so I sent her a really loving text, saying, hey, I love you and it breaks my heart to have this conversation. And I'm super grateful that you opened up to me and that we had this conversation. But the truth is that I can't put the energy that would be required to heal our relationship and repair all the trust fractures from years of abuse. I don't have the emotional energy to do that without abandoning parts of myself in my own life to do that. And I'm not able or willing to do that at this point. But, hopefully we can walk away realizing that our relationship was collateral damage for us to both learn some lessons, and that I'm always going to love you. And I'm not cutting you off. You can follow me on social media. You can reach out if, you want to check in and say hi, but I can't see you. I can't put myself in front of you physically, and I can't carve time out of my schedule to prioritize you and your emotional needs at this time.
Yeah.
She was pretty understanding, but she continued to send texts. I just wish I could hug you. I just wish I could hold you again and see you. And that was just hard. And I had to just let it be.
Yeah.
Because I had to choose what my body, my intuition is telling me to do. And that was a really interesting moment because it brought up this conversation between you and me. We're constantly talking about, how to repair with your narcissistic partner, how to say yes to their healing, how to say yes to the relationship in a culture where, narcissists are seen as demonic and horrible and you should just cut them off and walk away. Yeah. I'm here feeling all the love and understanding and compassion that I have towards every narcissistic person, towards my own partner, and feeling it towards her and still having to walk away. And that was a hard moment for me. Yeah. And it felt so unnatural for me because it is, for me, my nature to say yes to that.
It is so your nature to pick up every single wounded bird and heal them back to health and send them out. I mean, I've watched you do it all the time in your life and it's really beautiful. And that was, I've never understood exactly why it's so hard for the loved one of a narcissist or an empath to resist a narcissist. And I feel like I got a front row seat of this with you. And I just feel like I have so much more understanding for that. But I guess if you had to summarize it in, a quick bite size for people who are watching, what was it that gave you the strength to stand up for yourself and not let that narcissist back into your life?
That's a really interesting question. I think, honestly, I have been observing myself and my patterns for years now. And I think that's something that we don't talk about a lot when it comes to narcissist empath dynamics, because often empaths are seen as the victim, or it's they're a victim to this horrible manipulative narcissist that's tricked you into this relationship and now you feel like it's your fault and it's not your fault. And I think that's an important conversation to have. Yeah. But I think that what doesn't get talked about is that there are at its core wounds. There are wounds inside the empathic person that cause them to show up with an excessive amount of empathy, with an excessive amount of overextension and willingness to help someone that is abusing them. Yeah. And so my work has started by taking accountability for how I've co-created these dynamics in my life and just asking myself, what can I be responsible for? Because yes, on one side I might be a victim, but just leaving it there and saying, yep, I'm just a victim and going on with my life doesn't actually create any change, because I might walk away from one narcissist and then pair up with another one.
Totally.
And then another one, and then another one. Because just saying I as the empathic person or the loved one of a narcissist am a victim is the surface level problem.
Yeah.
The deeper problem is that I have wounds that attract me into these relationships over and over again. And one of those is, this is my belief that narcissists and empaths actually have the same core wound.
Yeah.
And that core wound is one of unworthiness and shame, low self-esteem. But that it's like the hair is fractured and they go off in two different directions. On one side, the narcissist copes with the feelings of low self-esteem, shame, and unworthiness through grandiosity, self-centeredness, and exploitation and manipulation and trying to be in control. And empaths, we also try to be in control. And we also seek validation, but we do it in a different way.
Yeah.
And how we do that is that we try to be in control by being so loving and forgiving and giving of ourselves that our hope in the back of our head is, if I am this loving and self-sacrificing, at some point it's going to encourage this person to love me back.
Yeah.
They'll be so inspired by all the love that I give and all of the abandonment of myself that it has to come back to me.
Yeah.
And then on the other side, we are also trying to deal with this deep-seated feeling of unworthiness, because in our minds we're saying, I am not worthy unless I'm giving of myself to somebody else.
Yep.
And so it becomes this perfect puzzle piece where one person wants to be served endlessly, and then I'm willing to serve that person endlessly.
Yeah.
Because it's helping to scratch this itch of, I'm unworthy unless I'm giving.
Yeah.
And, you're a black hole of taking.
Yeah.
And so I get to forever feel worthy in my pursuit of trying to please someone who always needs to be pleased.
Yeah.
And always needs to take. And I always need to give. But for the same core wound.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is where it's funny, because we have people who have said this in our support group where they're like, I don't get it. I keep getting narcissists. I'm always attracted. I'm on my fourth narcissist at this point. And it's like, statistically speaking, the chance, if there's only 5% of the population is narcissistic, the chance that you keep getting pulled into one over and over again is extremely low. So I think what you're saying is correct, and that people are drawn to that. And the sad thing is that the narrative that's out there already of, well, just cut them off and, get rid of the narcissist in your life and then go find somebody else. But like, when you actually look at that, it's not a great strategy, because if you don't heal that core wound, you're going to end up with another narcissist. And you see this over and over and over again. But the problem is, like, with that path of just leave them and go find somebody else, it's going to take you a year to divorce the person. It's going to take you a year to heal from the person, a year to find somebody else and date them, and then another year to find out that they're the narcissist. So you've now lost 5 or 6 years when, just to find yourself right at where you were to begin with.
Yeah. So just coming full circle with that in mind, the answer to your question, which was, how did you have the courage to have the self-awareness to make this decision? Really what it came down to was that I knew that there was a possibility that my emotional reaction was coming from a wounded place, because I had acknowledged that there is a wounded place inside of me to begin with.
Yeah.
And I think that for anyone that has narcissistic partners, if you think, oh, I had healthy parents and a perfect childhood and a perfect life and nothing's wrong, I would say you need to look again and you need to look deeper, because nobody chooses an abusive narcissistic partner over and over again that doesn't have any wounds.
Well, an abuse doesn't have to mean that you were hit. It could mean that you were just never okay being yourself. Or you had a parent who was overly obsessed with their work or their church or whatever thing it was, that you never got love just being you. And so you had to give and give and give to finally just be seen by a parent. Right. And these can be high-performing people, right?
Yeah, I would say that I have like the perfect family from the external, and my parents are good people, but it was just a combination of dynamics where I felt constantly unseen.
Yeah.
And so I was emotionally neglected.
Yeah.
But all my physical needs were met.
Yeah.
And from the outside, my parents are very charismatic, amazing, loving people. But it's just that sometimes wounds are created anyway, right? Trauma's not what happened to you. It's how you interpreted it and how it impacted you.
Totally.
So someone doesn't have to beat the crap out of you every day for you to have a deeply embedded wound of unworthiness.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
And so I think that self-reflection is key, and that's the first step.
Yeah. Well, and the last thing I'll say on this is that you were able to see the wounded part of you that was very emotional, like, but like she sees me, Chloe, like loves me. And I can imagine with like, I want that. And you could see that it was the wound speaking. You could see that and say, okay, cool. This is the wound. And versus if you don't have that perspective, it might just feel like that's what you really need, you know?
Yeah, we talk a lot about following your heart.
Yeah.
And I think that people confuse their heart with their emotions.
Yeah.
But when I say follow your heart, I mean follow your truth. Follow the true, intuitive, deeper part of you that is attuned to your purpose, right? And I think sometimes we're unconsciously following our wound.
Yeah.
And not really following our heart. So you need to be able to distinguish the two.
What would you say is your advice to somebody to knowing how to follow their heart in terms of whether or not to be with a narcissist or not? How could they connect with that heart?
I would say that the key indicators that separate following your heart from following your wound is that when you're following your heart, it comes from a place of love and groundedness and self-esteem.
Yeah.
Right? And if you're following your wound, it comes from a place of fear, scarcity, insecurity, or pain.
Yep.
So when I was noticing these two parts of me, my healthy self, I'll say my heart self, was saying, hey, we've done this before. We know what's going to happen. You don't have the space for this. This wouldn't be good for you. And my wound self is saying, all I've ever wanted is to be seen and loved. She sees and loves me. I need this. If I don't do it with her, nobody will. It's this wounded child that is craving this validation of being loved and accepted for who I am and knowing that she'll do that for me.
Yeah.
And it's this like very overpowering emotion, almost a sense of urgency.
Yeah.
Whereas your heart feels more grounded. There's not such a sense of urgency to it. You feel clear-minded. And so I always sit down and say, okay, at its core, what are my thoughts around this sounding like? And journaling them is really helpful so that you can kind of zoom out and look at them. If it's like with you, this is a great example of following my heart. When I think about our relationship, it's very grounded. It's, well, I see clearly that he has a pattern of accountability.
Yeah.
So even though it's hard to get there, we do get there and we always repair. It's thoughts like, we're building a beautiful family together and I want this stability for our kids. And you are on board with that.
Yeah.
It's at the end of the day, in my heart of hearts, my intuition is telling me that this is part of my purpose. And I trust that. It's a feeling of trust, groundedness. It's not this crazy frenzy of emotion.
Yeah.
It's not this, well, if I'm not with him, who else will be with me? It's not this, well, he sees me and I feel insecure and I want to be loved and seen, so I have to choose him. You know, I can sense the difference between when my heart is telling me, hey, this is something you can heal together. It's just going to be hard and take a lot of work and a lot of patience. Or if it's my wound saying, we have to choose this because this is our only option. And if we don't, something bad's going to happen. And,
Totally.
you know, there's this like energetic difference between the calm, grounded, intuitive feelings and the frenzied, erratic, emotional, fear-based emotions.
Totally. For me, I also notice it that my head is where kind of the fears exist, and in my gut and in my kind of more deeper in my body, my heart is where the love kind of more grounded emotions feel. And I think you described that perfectly. I think another aspect to this too is how hard it is when someone who has rejected you, where that's where your wound is, someone who's rejected you is now offering a chance to get back together. And I think what a lot of people who've never been with a narcissist don't understand is how a narcissist can feel so good when they are just praising the hell out of you and just idealizing you. Like, you are amazing. It's this high. And then when that flips and they reject you and say you're the worst, how like painful that is. And it's like pulling the slot machines. Like, I want to get back up to that high. Right. So, I guess like explain to someone who has never been with a narcissist before why that aspect is so hard for you to really close off the relationship.
Yeah, that's a really good thing to look at. I would say that let's look at the general sense of unworthiness that's always existing in my body.
Yeah.
The only thing that I crave at the end of the day is to know that I'm lovable.
Yeah.
Because my wound is that I'm unlovable and unworthy. And that's where that low self-esteem comes from that attracts me into narcissistic relationships. Because when a narcissist love bombs me and says, "Oh, you're perfect, you're gorgeous, you're smart, you're amazing, I want you, nobody wants you as much as I want you," that's exactly what I've always wanted to hear.
Yeah.
And so this little Kira in here that feels unlovable and unworthy constantly has her sensors out to hear that and to know that externally. Because the real work is internally validating that, but that's hard. Yeah. And that's what we're all working on out here, right? We're a bunch of adults who hate ourselves deep down and we're trying to figure out how do we stop doing that?
Yeah.
How do we build that self-esteem and self-love? And I think that everybody can resonate with this to some extent, that insecurity. And so because I'm at such a deficit of self-love, when someone's overextending on the love and the praise and the validation that they're giving me, it feels like a drug.
Totally.
Like, it feels like you've never felt happy in your whole life and you get hit up with some type of pleasure, joy, happy combustion drug right to the vein, and your entire body starts to explode with happy chemicals and love chemicals and dopamine and serotonin. And once you're there, just the rest of your life looks gray.
Yeah. And
then the contrast of, okay, when I'm with them, I feel all of these chemicals, this chemical soup cocktail of happiness and joy and serotonin and dopamine, compared to my normal life which is spent feeling deeply insecure about myself and constantly giving of myself and abandoning myself to feel some sense of worthiness.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it is so addictive. And I've seen this in our support groups that a lot of loved ones will say, "I am addicted to my narcissist and I can't stop."
Yeah.
And I completely understand, because it feels like you're starving and this person has now become the source of food.
Yeah.
And so of course you're going to be stuck on them.
Yeah.
Right? You're obsessed with how they fill your void. And I think that narcissists feel the same way about empathic people.
Oh yeah.
Right? And that's why we just stick together, and we just we try to pull away because the healthy part of us is like, no, this is bad, but we just keep coming back.
Well, and that's why it's important that I guess we're so passionate about finding these couples that are in this dynamic and that they are both healing their stuff. And it's like they are taking turns helping each other come back out of that downward spiral that they got in to begin with. You know, you heal and then I heal, and then I heal and then you heal. And we just keep laddering each other up until we can get to a place where we're having a beautiful dynamic where we can keep the parts that we love and offset all the problems, the anger, the defensiveness, the self-abandonment, the delusions. Get rid of all of those aspects, but keep all the good things, Well,
and then there's a secondary dragon to this, which is, the initial hit of that high, but then typically, in my experience, my narcissistic partners will go from that to then being cold and withdrawn and rejecting.
Yeah.
which mirrors what I felt in my childhood that created those wounds of unworthiness in the first place. So now inside of me, there's this inner child that's unconsciously trying to heal itself through the dynamic by saying, if I take this cold, self-centered person that doesn't see me or acknowledge my needs, and I somehow get them to see and acknowledge my needs and want me and love me, now I've healed this childhood wound of unworthiness.
Yeah.
Because if I can get you to love me and accept me, then I must be worthy.
Yeah.
And so it's actually
Goes to deep childhood
this
shit.
deep-seated journey to reclaim my worthiness through you. Yeah. And that's what creates the codependence, is because both people are externalizing and trying to heal their childhood wounding through each other, which will never work.
Yeah.
And that's why the healing that is necessary is to recenter on personal accountability for your own wounds and being responsible for your own emotions, your own emotional regulation, your own reparenting. And, we're holding hands while we do that for ourselves.
Yeah, I love that
instead of
visual.
trying to heal that through each other in this horrible
Or get the other person to
pattern.
change so I don't make my mistakes, right?
Yes.
I love that. Yeah, that's really good. Yeah. Another thing I want to talk about is that with Chloe, that was really hard for you to not jump back into that relationship. And you held really good boundaries in that conversation so that you didn't get sucked back into maybe making a decision you didn't really feel good about. So explain to people who have a narcissist who's trying to get them back into the relationship how you keep clear boundaries throughout the process of having this conversation with them of whether or not you want to do it.
Wow. Yeah, the first thing I want to say is that if you have someone trying to come back into your life, it might not always be a romantic partner.
Sure.
It might be a parent.
Yeah.
It might be a child. It might be a brother or a sister or a best friend.
Yeah.
So I think some people have some understanding of why boundaries are important with like an ex, for example.
Sure.
But I think that these boundaries need to apply no matter who you're talking to.
Yeah.
Even a parent. So the first boundary that I set was that I wasn't going to expose myself to a overly vulnerable situation, because that, once again, that self-awareness, I know myself well enough to know that if I get in person with somebody who's being very emotional and charismatic, I'm 99% of the time probably going to break.
Yeah.
Because my empathy takes over. It hijacks my system and I go, oh no, yeah, of course, I love you. And I cry and I just get really swept up into the experience. And so she wanted to continue to have this conversation in person. And she requested to see me in person multiple times and said, well, I'll tell you what I did wrong when I see you. And I just knew better. And I was very clear. I said, if I see you in person, I won't be able to respect my own boundaries. And so I'm unwilling to have this conversation in person.
Yeah.
That was one example of a boundary that I set, where I said, I'm not comfortable seeing you in person until I get the acknowledgement or accountability from you that I feel like I need to be safe. Right? So this is not to be withholding or to be manipulative. And I want that to make that clear. We're not saying I won't see you because I'm trying to manipulate you to get some answer. I'm saying I don't want to see you because it's not safe for me to see you.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be a version of me that I like. I'm going to fall back into an old pattern. So in order to respect the work I'm doing on myself, I need us to have this conversation over the phone, where that's a physical boundary, right? I'm physically maintaining space, and that's a consequence of the abuse that you put on me. So that's okay to have that boundary.
Yeah.
I don't owe you an in-person conversation at this point.
Totally.
Another boundary was that I was unwilling to emotionally make myself overly vulnerable in order to garner empathy.
Yeah.
And I think that empathic people think, well, I'll just tell them how I feel and then they'll understand. But I think that what's hard is that you make yourself really vulnerable to attack, because you say, this really hurt me, and then they can disrespect your vulnerable statement.
Yeah, because it hurts to be vulnerable and to say how you really feel about it. So you take off the armor and say, here it is. And then they go, and it hurts.
Yeah.
So you preserved your own energy in that way, that you didn't allow for an attack like that to happen. Not to say that narcissists are out trying to just attack, but anyone can not be aware. If they got
triggered by the interaction.
Which is very likely.
Yeah. Right. So I maintained a sense of emotional distance. So there's the physical boundary, and then there's the emotional boundary, which was, I'm not going to over disclose what I'm feeling. I'm only going to state what I need to know or what I'm thinking, right? So I would say something like, I need to know XYZ about your situation, or I want you to know that I'm not feeling safe or comfortable. And so I can't go deeper on this topic at this time.
Yeah.
And I think that any disrespect of that emotional boundary to say, I don't want to discuss this, I don't want to have you discuss this with me, or I don't want to have a conversation about excuses, was another one that I said, where I said, I don't want to have a conversation about excuses. I only want to have a conversation about what you can be accountable for. Because it's draining on my energy to hold space for hours of audio messages that are only excuses. And I'm not willing to validate those. And that's another boundary, is I'm not going to validate or interact with the excuses portion. I'm only going to address the core issues of our dynamic. I would like us to discuss that.
Yeah.
And only being willing to discuss the things that you need to discuss in order to feel safe and repair. And you don't have to get sucked into, their emotions or their excuses, or have them getting you to, giving them the control over the conversation. It's okay to maintain a sense of space and say, I won't discuss that.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And I think that I think you handled the whole thing with so much love. Like from start to finish, because it's so easy, given the rhetoric that's out there, to just say, like, cut them off and never respond again. And I felt that from the beginning, where you were able to talk to her with love, but also with boundaries. And then you were able to say, and the way that you ended it was like, ultimately, wow, you've taken a lot of accountability. That's beautiful to see that. But like, at the end of the day, I don't have the space in my life for it. And you sent her a great message that was, I think, conducive to her healing. Do you want to tell them a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think that sometimes boundaries can feel unkind, especially to people that aren't accustomed to having boundaries, which I think is true in codependent dynamics like narcissist and empath, or, abusive relationships or whatever. But you can be really kind with your boundaries. I didn't make any accusations. I didn't bring up all of my grievances of all the horrible wrongdoings of the past. I just simply asked, are you aware of why I walked away? Are you aware of the hurt you caused? And if so, can you please share it with me so that I know that we're on the same page and that you understand? And there's a little bit of kindness in not sitting someone down and saying, these are all the reasons why I walked away, because you're abusive and horrible and you have an alcohol addiction and you did all these horrible things. You lied, you cheated. I think that there was still this general air of, I love you, accept you, and forgive you, but I just can't love and accept and forgive you in a way that abandons myself, right? So at the end of the day, I took the time to validate and express love for everything that she had shared, and let her know that the love and forgiveness is all there, but that my decision has to do more with with my own self-preservation.
Yeah.
Than it does with her not being acceptable.
Totally.
And I think that sometimes when we've been hurt by a narcissist, we feel justified in sometimes being abusive back.
Yeah.
And hurtful back. Either that, because we want to justify not moving forward with the connection, or we, go back in the pattern and accept them into our lives too quickly.
Yeah. I thought it was so beautiful because you can still love and accept somebody and forgive somebody and not let them in your life.
Yeah.
Those aren't mutually exclusive, right?
Yeah.
You can preserve your own energy with boundaries that keep your life thriving and still give those things to somebody else.
Right.
And, you know, I think that what we ultimately want is to reduce the amount of hurt that's happening in the world, and hurt people hurt people. So if you do choose to exit the relationship or not let a narcissist back in, I think that the most kind thing you can do for them is do the thing that's going to help their healing long term. And I do think that Chloe, long term is gonna be really good for her, because she will actually have to take a look at like, wow, I missed out on like what a beautiful specimen and creature Kira is, and I don't get to have that in my life anymore because of my decisions. Now that is so helpful for her healing, because a lot of narcissists, we can self-delude and we can lie to ourselves and say, well, here's all the reasons that I'm not that bad of a person. But when someone exits your life like that, it forces you to look at it. And if they exit your life like this, fuck you, and angry at you, well, you can just write off some story of like why they're the worst. Or if they came at you with, here's all, like you were saying, here's all the things you did wrong. You know, as you say those things, their defenses prop up and they say, oh, here's why that's not true, and here's why that's not true. And they're inoculating themselves from the actual truth. But what was so beautiful what you did is you asked her to tell you what it was that she had done wrong. And you then reinforced what a great person she is in all the amazing ways that she is so great. And then also you just couldn't do it. You know, It's just such a beautiful thing. And I think at the end of the day, that's what we want, is because now Chloe is more likely to heal and not hurt somebody else down the road and not create more and more damage, because it's hurt people that hurt people. And there needs to be a quote for loving people that help heal people. I don't know what that is, but that's kind of what you did. And I was just really happy to see that.
Yeah, I think another point to add to what you just shared is that it's a kindness to allow people to experience the consequences of their actions. And the truth is that if you hurt and abuse somebody, sometimes that abuse can cause irreparable damage to a relationship.
Yeah.
And we're huge advocates of healing and repair, but I think sometimes you can't repair the damage that you've caused.
Yeah.
And I think that knowing when to acknowledge that the repair is not possible and allow that to be your reason, and to say it's not possible because I can't show up for the healing of this relationship and keep my self-love intact. It would require me to abandon myself or to deny the truth of how I feel to repair this with you. That's not kind. It's not kind to them, and it's not kind to you, because you're enabling their pattern and you're enabling your own negative pattern of self-abandonment. And the only way that healing can happen in this case, where there is irreparable damage, is to move forward and not make the same mistake again. It's to make a new choice. There's a quote out there that says that healing is learning to make a new choice. So when we learn to make a new decision, which means that we don't go back to the patterns that have harmed us, but we just accept that there's been damage there, can't be repaired. The best thing I can do here is tell the truth and kindly walk away with boundaries intact. That is the way that you heal, is through letting go.
Yeah. All right. I've got one more question for you. I think that many empaths or loved ones of narcissists see the hurt person that's truly underneath their narcissism, and they feel a sense of duty, because it's like sometimes the narcissist themselves unaware of it. It's like you're the only grown up in the room that can help this person sometimes. And they also just probably from patterns in their life take a lot of it on. And so they sit with a lot of guilt of whether or not, or for their decision to take care of themselves versus, help heal yet another person. So was that something that played a part in you? or I'm just curious how you dealt with that potential guilt of choosing to not help or be with this narcissist.
Yeah, I always feel that. I have this deep sense of responsibility for everybody's feelings and healing, which is normal for people in my situation. But yeah, there is the guilt and the shame. But once again, it just goes back to self-awareness, because that's just showing me where I still have work to do.
Yeah.
The guilt and shame that I feel, where I feel like I should be responsible for taking care of somebody else, is reminding me of that wounded child that felt responsible for my parents' emotions, that felt like I was, parentified and had to fix everything for everybody. But part of my healing is reclaiming the truth that I'm only responsible for myself. I'm responsible for my kids, obviously, but as far as adult relationships, I am not required to abuse myself in favor of helping somebody else.
Yeah.
So the truth is that they are responsible for their healing, and they might not choose to heal. And that's the hard work that I have to do, is in letting go of not being in control of that. And that's where I acknowledge, there's a part of me that wants to control the situation and make sure this person gets better.
Yeah.
I want to be responsible for that. I want to make sure it happens, and it's not going to happen without me. Well, the truth is that way of thinking is flawed, and it comes from a wounded place.
Yeah.
Believing that we are responsible to heal someone else is just simply not true. Everybody's responsible for their own healing. And the more we can accept that reality and simply acknowledge that, as much as we don't like that that's true and that it's out of our control, it's the only thing we can do at the end of the day. If somebody's not choosing their own healing path, all we can do is redirect the self-awareness of learning to let go of that shame that we hold around needing to be responsible for someone else. And that comes with building self-love, self-compassion, self-trust, self-respect. And that's a lifelong journey, I think, that everybody's on. So really, when you zoom out, the empath and the narcissist are on the same path of self-acceptance and self-healing.
What a beautiful way to end it. That was fantastic, babe. That's a really vulnerable thing that you just did. And I just appreciate you. And we hope that this was helpful to anybody out there. And something I noticed recently on our page is that less than 5% of people who are going to watch this video, even if they're return viewers, haven't actually subscribed. So if you find this content helpful, we would really love it if you'd be willing to subscribe, because it helps the channel. If you feel that this is a message that needs to be more accessible to people in the world, then we'd appreciate you doing us a little favor and subscribing or commenting below. So that's it. Thank you so much. See ya.